Hi, welcome to Brass Matters. I'm John Wallace, and if you don't know me, I'm obsessed with incredible performers, chance discoveries, and unexpected musical treasures. This week, we're talking about my symphony. I began it in 1974 and finished it in 2024. How can it take someone like me 50 years to complete a First Symphony? And is it worth waiting for? Helping me to answer this question is conductor, trumpeter and deputy director of music at the Laidlaw Music Centre at the University of St Andrews, Bede Williams. Bede conducted all of the bands involved in the symphony recordings between 2017 and 2024, the Whitburn Band, the Cooperation Band, and Kingdom Brass, jewels of Scotland all. So, Bede, what the devil have you been getting up to?
Just come back from a wonderful holiday, realising, well, just a 48-hour rather, city break, realising how fully fledged Iceland is as a independent cultural entity, but that was a wonderful break.
How did you end up in Scotland from New Zealand?
Oh, well, I'm the youngest of four. I've got an older brother and two older sisters, and I grew up south of Hamilton on a small, what would be called then lifestyle block, just a small block of land, not too many neighbours, and there wasn't much to do apart from, I remember as a kid I used to hit some golf balls, bounce on the trampoline, and then go practice music. So my mum and dad weren't musical, but wanted us to learn music. So we all played piano, but I also picked up the playing the trumpet through school. I actually wanted to play the saxophone, but there was none left, so it had to be the trumpet. And I just loved it, and started to join the local band at the recommendation of the school music teacher, and that's how banding entered my life, really.
New Zealand has got a tremendous reputation for banding. When I was, growing up and first playing the cornet in the mid-50s, my hero was Ken Smith. My dad bought me an EP of his Mendelssohn violin concerto that he played on the cornet. It was fabulous.
I started playing trumpet at school, but quickly moved to cornet to join the local brass band, a Hamilton Auxiliary Band, and then met an amazing man who recently had his 90th birthday, Colin Smith. And he taught me in that traditional brass band way, a real focus on playing as if you're singing. He never demonstrated or played in the lessons, just lots of singing and emulation and mimicry in the best possible way. And I grew up listening to other players in the band and trying to copy their sound. Bands in New Zealand are very rich. When I was a boy, I think they were a little bit more distinctive than they are now. I think I was very much aware of the hotbed of banding in Britain when I was a teenager, but it was somewhat inaccessible, so I was just in my early teens when the internet really opened up. And I remember sending away to Australia to have to buy CDs of different cornet solos that I was playing. Now, of course, information and ideas, and importantly sounds, travel much more freely, and I think that bands in New Zealand do sound more British, if such a thing can still be identified.
Did you become attached to the Woollerton?
Woolston. There was Woolston band.
Woolston.
Yeah, no. The band which I played with for a number of years was then Dalewool Auckland Brass, conducted by Nigel Weeks, who was a Welshman, now still living in New Zealand. And I went through all the youth band, the secondary schools brass band and the youth band of New Zealand. There was and still is now an incredible youth development program in New Zealand banding. It's very, very strong. But no, I was a member of Dalewall, and then as soon as I moved to Scotland, I applied to study in Glasgow. I joined the Cooperation Band, of course, which is one of the bands on the recording. So my banding roots in Scotland go back to the co-op, but I've worked with a lot of the bands in Scotland now and have an affection for them, for many of them, if not all of them. It was actually through the internet that my life changed, because I was studying, I was researching about where I could study in the United Kingdom. I found the royal schools. I'd done all my grades very diligently, including my fellowship at age 16. And the examiners very kindly took the time to write to me to suggest that I might apply, because there's these associated board international scholarships. And then I didn't even know where Glasgow really was. I knew what that Scotland was. And when I applied to study at the Royal, as then the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, I distinctly remember, I don't know how I remember, but I do, that when I sent off the envelope that I spelt Glasgow, Glascow, Glasgow. And I thought that would be a good place to go, because if the principal is a trumpeter, surely everything else has to be good. I was quite simplistic in my mind, and I remember arriving in Scotland in September 2003, having actually had the opportunity to visit Scotland a year earlier as a member of the New Zealand Army Band, playing in the Edinburgh Military Tattoo. And the rest is history. Met my now wife, and here we are, still some years later.
Yeah. What's it like tearing yourself away from such a beautiful country? Do you go back?
I do.
How often?
About once every year or 2 years. It's a very difficult thing to speak about, because Scotland's been incredibly good to me too. New Zealand is still, notwithstanding what I'm saying about information flow, still an isolated country, almost like I was alluded to about a country like Iceland. It is still very independent. It has the extent to which New Zealand's culture is influenced by many different strands is probably unusual, but the result of that is something quite distinctive. And if you go back to when New Zealand was settled, it took a long time for any tools or resources to arrive by boat. So if you were on the land needing to find a solution, it was up to you to do it your own way. So I think it's as a culture, we I think value self-starting and self-determination. I'm just going to make something my way. And I think for me, musically, I value that too. And I think I know that you think a similar way. And when it comes to brass playing, yes, it's good to take inspiration and to absolutely acknowledge our roots, but it's also important to say, well, I am playing now, what do I have to say? But yeah, it is hard, but I essentially have two roots. I mean, my accent, of course, is still very strong, so I'm told. I've spent more than half my life now in Scotland. My children are Scottish, but very aware of their New Zealand roots, and I think there will be times in the future where I spend long periods of time in New Zealand. And one of the greatest things that I've been able to enjoy since living in Scotland is actually performing music by New Zealand composers, being very reflective about what constitutes New Zealand music. And I subsequently went back to New Zealand to do that at the Auckland International Arts Festival. So I have been very lucky to be able to continue to do every couple of years some musical exchanges, and I think they only become more and more important to me. So yeah, I feel actually, speaking to you now, very fortunate that I have, I think now, heritage in two places.
So my symphony would still be in bits in the waste paper basket if you hadn't got involved in it.
For me, there's two things which really attracted me to this project overall. One is that this was a symphony for brass band. There are a few. There's one or two which nearly get to the scale of yours. But I was really interested in how could a symphonic construction be placed, with a brass band. And I was also very interested, as I am with any symphony by any composer, what would a musician like you write for a symphony and a brass band? Because a symphony is because of Beethoven, it seems to, we have this idea that it's a deep, personal statement about, it's a thesis on abstract instrumental music. And knowing your playing, I now know your composition actually quite a lot, because I've done a lot of your music now, the opera, the trumpet music. I still think you need to write a brass quintet. We can talk about that maybe. But yeah, we did the second movement in St. Andrews, but I just wanted to keep on going with it, to try and almost get inside your head and understand what you made for this possibility.
I suppose I found it so difficult to write this symphony because it was all about me and my experiences of life and how I'd actually got to where I'd got. So I put my whole life into it. And, being brought up in Scotland, you have self-esteem problems. I just wondered if my life was that interesting to to talk about. So I based it on the places that I grew up and where I came from. And in actual fact, I found they were very, very interesting. The past that went into, rearing kids like me in the same area, from the genetics of my parents, my grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on that come before. All of that went into and it was very difficult to express that and see it through to conclusion. And so the conclusion was that, like, the third movement is really light-hearted. It's the place I came from, Methilhill, which everybody thinks is, oh God, imagine coming from a place like that. But when I was brought up there, it was vibrant. All the mines were open. There were sort of trams running from Leven to Kirkcaldy every 5 minutes. It was a conurbation. There was a brickworks, there was a steelworks, there was Balfours. There's so much going on there. My dad used to lift me over the turnstiles at Bayview, East 5. I saw them beat Sunderland 2-1 when they opened the floodlights in 1955. And there was 25,000 people there. It's absolutely heaving with life, heaving with character, and all the rest of it. And so I put that into the third movement. What fun it was growing up there. And then the fourth movement does get a little bit tragic because the First World War really ruined Scotland. So many people got killed in it. There were so many people injured. Not many people came back. Economic activity afterwards was sort of impacted, and we've never really we've declined gradually. I mean, the 50s, 60s, 70s, it took a long time to unravel. So the last movement is really about, but it has variations because all of the fifers I've known, and I've grown up there, are full of fun, are full of devilment. My relations, my cousin Derek, is always he's jokes so much about his tortoises and stuff that my sister and I never believed that they existed, and he was making up little videos of them, from the internet to send them to, until we actually saw them trampling all over his garden. So that's why the variations in that are full of fun. But in the end, it's really tragic. And so I would like to, if I've got enough time left, I'd like to write a really positive thing, because I think that Scotland has got so much potential, in the 21st century to do well. If we can only get certain things like politics sorted out, it wouldn't be so bad. So it was a great inner battle to get this thing finished for me, because I was 1974. I started to write it, and then I got offered the job by Howard Snell. Rang up from the LSO. And, you're impecunious as a composer. I didn't have any money. So if the LSO ring you up to go and play the trumpet with them, so I went and did that. And, of course, that knocked on your time availability. And then I had a few pieces played by Philharmonia and so on. And at the Royal Festival Hall, they got a terrible panning in the national press. And that kicked my ego into touch, and so I put it on hold. I still kept writing little things until it came to my retirement, and I thought, well, I'm going to give this another go. But I wouldn't have picked up all of these bits out of the waste paper basket without your encouragement. So thanks very much, Pete. Oh, was it worth it?
It was. It absolutely was. Good things, it can be said, sometimes take time to reveal themselves. There was a challenge in working on this project in that we did the second movement, and then we did the first, then the third, then the fourth. And they're large spans of music to learn, and the reward for me, I just had an instinct that it was all going to come together as a form. But it's quite unusual you can now, because we've got it on recording, experience it as a whole sweep as it temporarily unfolds. But we recorded it out of order, and I don't think we could have done it another way, given the time that it takes to work on this with the band, and just the practicalities and the logistics of having all these extra performers involved.
Yeah, there's a very big tuba part in the third and fourth movements. That's because Jim Gourlay, who runs the River City band in Pittsburgh now, was born in the next street to me. And so that in Dunsire Street, in actual fact, in Methilhill, which is where, and Robert Dunsire was the Victoria Cross guy who was a soprano cornet player in Dunakeer Colliery Band, who actually, he got the Victoria Cross, came back, got it, went to Buckingham Palace, all the rest of it, then went back to the front and died about 3 months later. Very, very tragic. His violin is still in the Adam Smith Museum, recently restored, because he used to play the fiddle for the guys in the trenches as well, to cheer them up. And so it was all about him, really, a fantastic character. And when he finally bought it, he just said, lads, don't worry about me, I'll be fine, I'm going now. That was his last words, which were published in the Leven Mail, of course.
Yeah, so it's interesting hearing you speak now, because the third movement, as you've said, the Methilhill Scherzo. Yes. Yeah. You're saying that, of course, as you said, that's where you were brought up, but you remember the fun, the joyfulness, the jokes, the humour. But it's ultimately perhaps a tragic symphony in some ways, but the heart of it cast in the third movement, perhaps. I find that as a form, it's traditional, it's 4 movements, but the first movement really functions as an entrada. It's not a fully developed stretch of music. It's very taut in its construction. Then it unfolds into the second movement, Tentsmuir, which is much longer, and that visceral energy, which is very, very intense in the first movement, dissipates in the elongated improvisation between Alistair MacDonald on electronics and Marco Blaauw on the double bell trumpet before the band comes in. And we performed the second movement, Tentsmuir, in the Younger Hall, as a part of the final concert of the brass festival called Fringe of Gold. And then the next day we went to the conservatoire to record it. And so the second movement, Tentsmuir is the nature reserve just close to St. Andrews.
Yes, it's between the River Eden and Tay, and it's an enormous sandbank that's built up over thousands of years, and it's got 2 seal colonies on it, and it's got these seals sing as well. It's a bit of the mating ritual, but there's about 4,000 or 5,000 seals, and when they get going, it's really eerie and it's like, the mermaids that used to sort of induce sailors to sail onto the rocks, And of course, there's Marco Blaauw. When I heard him and his incredible split note technique, where he can control a split note, it's just the most unearthly sound on the trumpet I'd ever heard. So I thought that expresses Tentsmuir, but it was very difficult to realize that. I had it all in bits, and I think you encouraged me to finish it before we got to actually playing it.
When was the second movement composed by? Was that one of the very early?
It was very first. You remember I found that thing with the sort of 28th of October 1974 or something,
right?
With all this the melodic material sketched out.
And then the first movement also, it comes from that era. Then there was a big and the third movement. It's the fourth movement which was composed later.
The fourth movement was in little bits and pieces. I knew what and you had the sound in my head. The sound in my head was like Armageddon, like First World War battlefield. It's very much like they're doing in the Donetsk and Luhansk areas at the moment, just artillery battles. That sort of very old-fashioned warfare. They're fun. And that was the sound going through, and I just could not get that down on paper until I realized that I wasn't in a harmony lesson, and I could get away with writing successions of 12-note chords. And you know yourself that the beginning of that movement has that, like, I don't know how you can stand. So it's like harmonic saturation.
And then when by the time the third movement comes, we're actually, it's right that I think that's a scherzo. There's a order is restored. And then it took me quite some time to digest the fourth movement. I remember asking you the rag, like, what is this Dunsire Street rag? And there is, after that big cacophonous wall of sounds that begins that movement, there is the quintet making the statement of the rag. And I said, well, what is this? And I'm thinking, is this like, I can't click my fingers to this. Is this like rag and ragtime, or what's going on? Then you said like rag as in just thrown away, as in something which not valueless, but just happens, just a statement of fact.
Yeah, well, it was the period of ragtime, the precursor of jazz, but I think ragtime and stuff only caught on later in the 20s in Scotland, and everybody went to the kirk then. Even in my day, everybody went, I went to Sunday school and I was in Bible class till age 15, and then you went to the church after that, and it was, so it's more like a chorale or a hymn tune that has it's ragged as well, and it just seemed the right thing to do. And then all of solos the people are so talented. When I was young, everybody used to do a turn at all of the parties that we were at. So everybody in the band has got a turn. And you could just imagine that being in the trenches as well, because it wasn't relentless all the time. They had so much boring time in between bombardments and stuff that they were bound to. And so I just thought of, of Robert Dunsire getting his fiddle out, playing things, and then bound after he finished, somebody else was bound to do something, and so there's all of these variations with different members of the band doing their turns, but then in the end, the inevitable happens, and that big Monty Python foot comes down and splatters everything.
You mentioned at one point that you're very fond of Brahms 4.
Yeah.
And that there was, I don't want to say a model, but the idea...
That's why there's 14 variations.
That's right, yeah. And of course, you grew up, as I grew up, playing variations.
Mm-hmm.
I recently had a performance student who was a recorder player do a 30-minute recital on variations. And it really is an incredible genre, if you like, and it is a genre, and it is an art form to play variations and to get that showmanship and to recognize kind of just the knife edge, the very fine line between seriousness and being jovial, and I think you capture that.
Well, I think, without this becoming a mutual appreciation society, I think you caught the gear changes as well quite subtly, because it's like there's 14 different gears, and I never believe in air varies being played at metronomically the same speed throughout. That is a real killer. I don't know where that came from, because it's so unhuman to play an air vary at the same speed right throughout. You have to have gear changes, and and play each variation at a slightly different speed, and that's something that you just intuitively understood from your sort of indomitable Kiwi background, I think.
I'm pleased that comes across. The band did incredibly well, as did all the bands, and I think it's worth noting we're here circling around the richness of the extra musical thought, some of the autobiography, the fifeness of the piece. Another thing that attracted me to the symphony, I know that it started, and we've spoken a little bit about the genesis of it, but in its final form, the final scoring is very unusual. Can you just talk us through exactly what each movement is scored for and why?
Well, the first movement is scored for brass band and 6 natural trumpets. And so when I started it, of course, I was one of the early people in the early music movement in the early 70s. We used to have people like Eric Hapney and all of that on his natural trumpet coming to play the fireworks music and the water music on the backs of King's College, Cambridge, with punts and all the rest of it. And that was in 1970. And so it wasn't unusual for me to think about the natural trumpet. If that sounds zany when it's finally completed in the 2020s, it's because we're way behind where we were in the 70s. The second movement with live electronics, that's where I was as well in the early 70s, and because in the Gibbs building, Tim Suster and Roger Smalley and Andrew Powell and all of that mob had the whole of the upper part of the Gibbs building open for this avant-garde, weird electronic music. Tim and Roger Smalley, they'd been over working with Stockhausen in his studio and everything. So live electronics that was my, and I went to York University to do a PhD in composition, which I never completed, and we were all into the electronic music, live electronic music at that time as well. So it wasn't unusual in the early 70s when we were all avant-garde, but by the staid 2020s, it never really caught on, especially in brass bands. So so that was one of the reasons I felt a little bit temeritous about it, that this was a fad of you playing the natural trumpet in all sorts of pieces and then doing live electronics, which had sort of disappeared. So maybe it just told my age. So in the third and fourth movements that needed more work doing to them, I was a lot more careful about using any unusual instruments. In fact, when the natural trumpets come back in the fourth movement, I got rid of that and just put it on the band, so that you've got the cornets playing with all valves down and just playing on the natural harmonics of the instrument. But that was one of the startling things about composing something over 50 years, is that some things that were really quite advanced in the early 70s, by the time 50 years is like, they're old hat and people laugh at them. So that was one of the slight sort of agonies I had about, oh God, do I really do this, or do I rewrite the other movements as well? But it's almost, I think the second movement really owes so much to just letting go and letting Alistair MacDonald and Marco Blaauw just do their shtick together, and this sort of intuitive music sort of thing of just letting it hang out. We did this project with Marcus Stockhausen in Cambridge in 2015, and it was just wonderful to see how he just let it happen. So just leaving it to let happen in Tentsmuir was the right thing to do. So, I didn't really compose that piece. Really, it was a framework for Alistair and Marco to improvise, and the effect is so much better than anything I could have written. And that's one of my faults. I tend to be over-prescriptive and write down too many notes instead of just putting a squiggly line and saying, improvise,
Yeah. Could you say more about the brass quintet in the third and fourth movements? There is a piece or two I'm aware of for brass band quintet and brass band, but this is an orchestral brass. And I was really, still am, I'm amazed at how different. And when you hear the orchestral brass instruments and players against, and sometimes with the band, it's they're two different worlds.
Yes, I just like the austerity really of the brass quintet when contrasted with the opulence of the brass band. If you have both, you appreciate both. You appreciate the brass band opulence, but without that almost austere brass, you wouldn't realize it was such a voluptuous sound that comes out of a brass band. I don't think brass banders themselves get it, how impressive it is. It is just so impressive. And that was really my idea, in that the brass quintet, don't go over. They don't have that much to do, but it is telling. I tried to make every note count, because you don't want a brass quintet really strutting its stuff when you've got a brass band sitting there thinking, Oh Christ, we can play twice as fast as that, twice as loud, twice as high. And I just wanted to be complimentary in a way. And the guys seemed to get it. They really got it. And what I was amazed by the brass bands involved is that how complimentary they were about the quintet playing. They seemed to appreciate the straight sounds and the intonation and the tone colours and that. And the tone colours you can get out of brass instruments are infinite, dealing with the power of the trumpet and so on. But I just sort of realised how sophisticated the brass banders were in their acceptance of the classical sounds. Because it wasn't the same when I was growing up and in my day. There was a big gulf between the two, and I was ripped out of the brass band system by my classical teachers because they thought, oh, this will ruin your playing, which was absolute nonsense.
We've got to give credit to the bands for not only playing as well as they did, but for agreeing to take it on. I mean, as I said, this music doesn't instantly reveal itself. And I think that you can ask for no more from musicians other than trust, and I think that the bands absolutely did trust us. They just, as Julian Johnson said, sometimes you need to suspend your desire to be entertained. A lot of banding music does come and present it what it is very, very, very instantly, but this less so. Though, be interested to see how the record drops, so to say, and what other, because we are here having this conversation before the recording has been released, and I can't actually wait to hear what people make of this as a 50-minute experience.
Yes, well, it was a COVID-affected project, really, because I had it finished and it was going to be played down at the Royal Northern in April 2020 with Nick Childs and Black Dyke doing two of the movements and the RNCM brass band doing another two of the movements, and Mark O'Keefe was going to do the double-belled solo, and it was all set up. And of course everybody knows what happened in April 2020 with COVID. The whole thing fell apart, and it's been impossible to pick up afterwards because the world has just moved on. But it did then just give us the opportunity to say, well, let's record it, and listening to it, I think it's probably a better result, and let's see where it goes next. It means there's brass bands all over the place. Maybe they'll take it on. Maybe they won't.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what circumstances would need to be right for a full performance of it. It's would all be a lot worse off if we didn't have the RNCM festival, and we of course try to, as much as we can at St Andrews, do a lot of adventurous things. I think I feel very responsible at St Andrews for ensuring that we're not duplicating what can happen without the infrastructure and organisational muscle of a university, and by implication the resource. And it's probably another reason why I was attracted to this, knowing that we have the resources and the time to do it, with the amazing Bob Whitney, because it was not an easy thing to record.
Well, we're very lucky to have Bob as the sort of recording engineer up at the Conservatoire.
with all of their spaces that we were given access to, which was brilliant. And from his his experience at Abbey Road and doing outside things as well, because we did it in different venues and over a long period of time, I think the sounds aren't absolutely matched throughout, but with such diverse instrumentation, it couldn't be anyway. So the slightly different sound picture for each piece, I think really works. And I'll take today's conversation and try to develop the ethos of the third movement into something that's really positive and life affirming. Maybe it'll be a symphony for brass quintet. Who knows?
That would be something.
You can see and hear more of Bede's work on the Music from St Andrews YouTube site at Music from St Andrews. And Bede, is there anywhere else?
BedeWilliams.com.
BedeWilliams.com. Thanks, Bede, for your insights.
Thanks for having me, John.
Thanks to Bede for coming to talk to me today to prove that brass matters.